Five Commando. In the early 1960s, as colonial empires collapsed and Africa's new nations descended into instability, the modern mercenary was born. The Congo became the proving ground. In 1964, former British officer Mad Mike Hoare formed Five Commando to fight the Simba Rebellion, a brutal uprising threatening the newly independent state. The government, desperate to restore order, turned to Hoare, who recruited hundreds of hardened veterans from South Africa and Rhodesia. They were men drawn by adventure, money, and a love of soldiering. Five Commando fought like a professional regiment rather than a band of outlaws. Hoare enforced military discipline, shaved faces, polished boots, church on Sundays, and his troops retook cities like Stanleyville, freeing hundreds of European hostages. Their success restored government control but left behind a trail of devastation. After the unit disbanded in 1967, Hoare resurfaced in 1981, leading a failed coup in the Seychelles disguised as a rugby team. Captured and jailed, he was later released and lived until 2020, a living symbol of the first modern mercenary generation, audacious, disciplined, and ungoverned. But while Hoare's era of disciplined adventurism shaped the early mercenary image, another figure soon pushed the trade into something far more political. A man who didn't just fight wars, but installed governments, Bob Denard and Les Affreux. As Hoare's campaigns ended, another name dominated post-colonial Africa, Bob Denard, a French naval commando turned soldier for hire. A veteran of France's counterinsurgencies in Indochina and Algeria, Denard saw profit in the chaos left by retreating colonial powers. Backed quietly by elements of French intelligence, he led operations in Katanga, Biafra, Yemen, and later the Comoros Islands, where he became kingmaker. His private army of French and Belgian veterans, nicknamed Les Affreux, the Terrible Ones, seized control of the Comoros in 1975. Denard built a palace guard, lived in a fortified villa, and effectively ruled through puppet presidents for more than a decade. His forces crushed dissent, guarded gold reserves, and maintained a fragile order that served Paris's strategic interests. In 1977, Denard's reckless attempt to invade Benin failed within hours, and his power began to wane. Yet even after being ousted, he returned in 1989 for another coup before finally being captured by French special forces in 1995. Tried but never imprisoned, Denard died in 2007, remembered as the archetype of the Cold War mercenary, part adventurer, part political instrument. Yet the age of individual warlords couldn't last forever. As governments sought influence without fingerprints, the mercenary world shifted from lone soldiers to organized companies. Watchguard International. In 1965, Colonel David Sterling, the founder of Britain's SAS, created Watchguard International, one of the first professional private military companies. Unlike the chaotic mercenary bands in Africa, Watchguard operated from London boardrooms, offering military solutions to allied regimes. Its consultants, elite British veterans, trained forces in Oman during the Dhofar Rebellion, advised royalists in North Yemen, and quietly supported governments in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. There were even secret plans to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi in Libya in 1970 and restore the exiled King Idris, a mission canceled before launch. Watchguard proved that privatized war could look legitimate, a clean, structured, and officially advisory version of the old mercenary trade. But even this new corporate model needed a deeper layer of deniability. That gap was filled by a quieter, more covert successor, one designed to operate in places official armies couldn't go. Keenie Meenie Services, KMS. A decade later, Britain's unofficial wars required an even more discreet tool. Founded in 1975 by former SAS officers, Keenie Meenie Services, named after a Swahili phrase meaning sneaky movement, became the shadow arm of British influence. KMS trained the Sri Lankan Special Task Force during the Civil War, flew combat helicopters, and directed counterinsurgency raids against the Tamil Tigers. Later, its instructors trained Afghan Mujahideen fighting Soviet forces under a tacit British mandate, and likely supported US-backed Contra rebels in Central America. Though officially private, KMS worked in sync with Western intelligence, giving governments a way to act where diplomacy forbade. Reports later tied its members to extrajudicial killings and human rights abuses, forcing the company to dissolve quietly in the late 1980s. KMS left behind a crucial precedent: that war could be outsourced to trusted veterans while governments kept their hands clean. When the Cold War ended, the battlefield changed again. Old empires withdrew, states collapsed, and private companies stepped forward with something entirely new: armies for hire. Executive Outcomes. In 1989, South African officer Eben Barlow founded Executive Outcomes, EO, the first private army to operate like a corporation. Its ranks included veterans from South Africa's 32 Battalion and Special Forces. EO provided what it called total military solutions, everything from logistics and aircraft to infantry and armored support. In Angola, EO's 500 men helped the government crush UNITA rebels, retaking oil-rich cities and reopening trade routes. In Sierra Leone, when the government faced collapse, EO deployed within days, launching helicopter assaults and ground offensives that pushed the Revolutionary United Front more than 60 miles from the capital. Within 2 weeks, Freetown was secure. International observers were stunned. A private army had done what the UN and regional forces failed to achieve. EO's success came at a cost: accusations of excessive force and exploitation of diamond revenues. Under international pressure and new South African laws banning mercenary work, EO shut down in 1999. But its veterans spread across the world, joining Sandline, STTEP, and other firms, proving that private warfare could be fast, effective, and profitable. And as Executive Outcomes dominated African wars, another firm emerged claiming to make private warfare cleaner, legal, and diplomatic, a promise that would soon trigger crisis after crisis: Sandline International. Founded in the early 1990s by Tim Spicer, Sandline International tried to make privatized warfare legal and diplomatic. Based in London, it offered training, logistics, and full-scale military intervention for governments in crisis. In Papua New Guinea, 1997, Sandline was hired to end the Bougainville Rebellion. When the deal leaked, the National Army mutinied, arrested the contractors, and forced the Prime Minister to resign, a scandal known as the Sandline Affair. A year later in Sierra Leone, Sandline worked to restore the ousted president, airlifting weapons and personnel in defiance of a UN embargo. The exposure triggered the Arms to Africa scandal, forcing Britain to admit its quiet involvement. By 2004, after mounting political pressure, Sandline dissolved. Yet it left behind an essential lesson: even a lawful private army could destabilize nations as easily as it saved them. But the industry was about to scale even further. When the War on Terror began, private armies didn't operate in shadows anymore. They became embedded inside US and NATO operations. DynCorp International. Founded in 1946, DynCorp International evolved from aircraft maintenance into one of America's most embedded military contractors. It trained police forces for UN missions in the Balkans, ran logistics for the US Army, and later played a key role in Iraq and Afghanistan, training local police, managing bases, and protecting diplomats. In Colombia, DynCorp participated in Plan Colombia, spraying coca fields and supporting counter-cartel missions, while in Somalia and Kosovo, it maintained peacekeeping aircraft. Despite its scale, DynCorp faced serious allegations: chemical exposure, civilian harm, and sex trafficking during the Bosnia mission in 1999. Lawsuits followed, but the contracts kept coming. By the time it was absorbed by Amentum in 2021, DynCorp represented the complete transformation of mercenary work, from freelance soldiering to corporate warfare infrastructure. Among these corporate giants, one name quickly became both indispensable and infamous: a company that would redefine the limits of what private contractors could do in a war zone: Blackwater. In 1997, former U.S. Navy SEAL Eric Prince founded Blackwater USA, a private training center that turned into the most infamous private army of the modern era. After the attacks of 9/11, Blackwater became indispensable. Under State Department contracts, it guarded ambassadors, escorted convoys, and even provided its own helicopter gunships in Iraq and Afghanistan. At its peak, Blackwater fielded thousands of contractors across war zones, often better armed and paid than regular soldiers. But on September 16, 2007, Blackwater guards opened fire in Baghdad's Nisour Square, killing 14 civilians. The massacre sparked international outrage, congressional hearings, and years of trials. 4 contractors were convicted of manslaughter, later pardoned in 2020, and the company rebranded as ZA Services, then Academy, before merging into Constellis Group. Despite the name changes, Blackwater reshaped how the world viewed privatized force. Effective, controversial, and largely unaccountable. Prince later founded Frontier Services Group, serving Chinese infrastructure projects in Africa, proving that mercenary expertise had become a global business model. While Blackwater dominated headlines, another British-led force quietly shaped the contractor landscape, not with shock, but with structure and coordination. Aegis Defense Services. Founded in 2002 by Tim Spicer, Aegis refined the British version of private warfare. In 2004, it secured a $293 million Pentagon contract to coordinate all private security firms in Iraq, effectively overseeing the private war effort itself. Aegis's multinational workforce included former SAS soldiers, Gurkhas, and African contractors. The firm expanded into Afghanistan, Libya, Sudan, and Saudi Arabia, providing security, training, and advisory services. But its reputation took a hit when a video surfaced showing guards firing at civilian vehicles in Baghdad. No charges followed, but the footage became symbolic of unchecked power in privatized war zones. In 2015, Aegis was acquired by GardaWorld, marking the rise of massive global security conglomerates. Privatized warfare now managed from corporate towers instead of battlefields. But by the 2000s, the mercenary world shifted again. Now private armies weren't just businesses. They became tools of state power, blurring the line between soldier and proxy. Wagner Group. Founded around 2014, Wagner Group began as a covert Russian force in Ukraine's Donbass, giving the Kremlin a deniable army. Led by ex-Spetsnaz officer Dmitry Utkin and financed by Yevgeny Prigozhin, Wagner fought Russia's wars while officially not existing. It soon appeared in Syria, capturing oil facilities for the Assad regime, and in Libya, Mali, and the Central African Republic, where it traded military support for mining rights. In 2018, U.S. airstrikes in Deir ez-Zor killed over 100 Wagner fighters attempting to seize an oil plant, a rare direct clash between a state and a private army. During Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine, Wagner spearheaded the siege of Bakhmut, using waves of convicts and human wave assaults that eventually took the city at staggering cost. In June 2023, Prigozhin rebelled, capturing Rostov-on-Don and marching toward Moscow before striking a deal. 2 months later, his plane exploded mid-air, his death ending Wagner's independence. Yet its operations in Africa continue under new Russian command, showing that the Wagner model, war for resources, power, and deniability, remains alive. And as Russia expanded its influence through Wagner, another regional power adopted the same model, but with ideology, not profit, at its core. Sadat International. In 2012, retired Turkish General Adnan Tanrıverdi founded Sadat International Defense Consultancy in Istanbul. Officially, it trained Muslim nations for self-defense. In reality, it became a paramilitary arm of Turkish foreign policy. Working with Turkey's intelligence service, MIT, Sadat trained Islamist-aligned militias in Syria, transported fighters to Libya, and later deployed Syrian mercenaries to assist Azerbaijan in the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh War. By the 2020s, Sadat expanded into Africa, sending personnel to Niger, Mali, and Somalia to secure Turkish facilities and counter jihadist groups. These operations blended ideology, profit, and state strategy, promoting Ankara's vision of influence through privatized power. Sadat now represents the newest generation of mercenary forces, not freelancers or corporations, but state-aligned ideological armies that shape conflicts far beyond their borders. From the Congo's jungles to the streets of Bakhmut, mercenaries have transformed from rogue adventurers into corporate and ideological instruments of global power. They no longer just fight wars, they manage them, profit from them, and reshape them in their employer's image. To see how the most secretive state units blurred these same lines inside Russia, continue to our next breakdown. Every Russian Spetsnaz unit explained in detail. It reveals how Russia's elite special forces evolved, operated in secrecy, and inspired the rise of modern private armies like Wagner.